Welcome to Practice Disrupted, a podcast where we find ways to create new solutions to current challenges while elevating the value of architects. I'm your host, Evelyn Lee, an architect who spans tech as an angel investor, startup advisor, and founder of Practice of Architecture. Whether you're a seasoned architect or just starting in the field, this podcast is your gateway to think differently about the role architects play within our global community. Hello, Disruptors. Welcome back to this week's episode of Practice Disrupted. Today, we're speaking with someone who brings a unique and unconventional perspective to the world of architecture. Our guest, Rolf Provan, is currently the CEO of Luckett and Farley, an architecture, engineering, and interior design firm. Rolf's journey to this leadership role is anything but traditional. He has spent his career driving client-focused innovation and change for some of the world's biggest brands. Think Shell, Coca-Cola, and Volvo. As a creative dot connector, he's deeply in tune with the design community and understands the transformative power of an interdisciplinary approach. Since joining Luckett and Farley, Rolf has been instrumental in defining the company's purpose and vision, advocating for design's central role not just within the firm, but in the broader community and region. In our conversation, we explore Rolf's career path, discussing how his diverse experiences have shaped his leadership style and where he sees the biggest opportunities for our industry to drive meaningful change. Hi, Rolf. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on Practice Disrupted.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so we'd like to do a little icebreaker every time we start up an episode. So this season, I've been asking our guests, is there an interesting fact that you might want to share that's not in your formal bio that can be relevant to this conversation, or it might be completely irrelevant of the conversation?
Okay, well, I don't know how relevant it's relevant to me. It may not be obvious to other people that it's relevant, so I'll share it. But I have lived during my life and my career in 8 different countries on 5 continents. And I speak 3 languages fluently and 3 others a little bit. So there you go. So we'll see how relevant that is as we go through. I'm going to speak mostly in English during this conversation, but
I appreciate that. I'm horrible at languages. I'm listening to Adam Grant's book, Hidden Potential, and he has this very particular little piece of it on linguists, right? And the fact that a lot of these multilingual individuals actually learn languages as an adult by leaning into being uncomfortable in order for them to learn. So I'm trying to learn something from that book, but I've always said that I was horrible at languages, but now, maybe it's not too late.
Well, so the second of those 3 languages I learned, the third one, I started when I was 28, and it was uncomfortable.
Yes. So one of the reasons why I was so interested in having you here, and we met at a Christopher Kelly Leadership Development Program put on by AIA Kentucky, was because you're a CEO of an architecture and engineering firm, Luckett and Farley, but you actually don't have a background in architecture, which I think is highly unusual. And we might even talk about that an individual with your background should find yourself in the position of CEO at an A&E firm. So I would love to hear, or at least have our audience here and our listeners hear a little bit more about that background that you have and kind of how you found your way to Luckett and Farley.
So if I go all the way back to early teens, the school I was at had a non-academic kind of class to do technical drawing. And I was probably 12 or 13 when I started doing it. And because it was non-academic, I was discouraged by my parents from pursuing it, but I loved it. I loved it. And I was good at it as well. And that's a rare combination for me. But I left it behind, and so I didn't really think too much about that. But as I ran through my life, really unconsciously, I was always attracted to design in different ways. And I spent, a fair bit of time when I was in college. I lived in Paris And it's hard to be in Paris and not pay attention to what's surrounding you in terms of the built environment, especially if you're interested in that. And like I said, I didn't have an educated interest in it, but I had a layman's interest in it, and I was attracted to it and paid attention to it. So that's, I guess, sort of where the foundation began, and I didn't really know at that time how that was going to play back into my life later on. So later in my career, I've done a lot of different things, mostly marketing and innovation driven in lots of different kinds of industries. So I would say that what's sort of consistent in my career is diversity of business, of business models, of industries, of country, of culture. I'm a curious person, so I think that's probably at the root of it for me. And I had been part of a startup which hadn't been able to raise enough money to continue. And so I left and started thinking, what am I going to do next? And probably for the first time in my life, I reflected much more deeply about what I was passionate about. And design in some shape or form kind of came to the top of the list. And so I started looking for opportunities to fulfill that. And Luckett and Farley is in the town where I live in Louisville, Kentucky. And I knew the name. That was really most of what I knew at that point. And I had seen an ad that they were looking for a marketing professional to help them out. And I met with the CEO. And it became clear to me in our conversations that we both arrived at a similar idea about what it looks like to be successful as an architecture firm from completely different perspectives. He's, 30-year experienced, a very talented architect. I have practically no understanding of architect as a discipline, but from a brand marketing and innovation point of view, can kind of arrive at some of the same places, just from a more business strategy point of view. So we became, I think, very quickly, we realized that we could help each other, and he created a new position and invited me to join the company. Outside of that, I'm a brand person at heart, I suppose, as well as a design person. And Luckett and Farley is the oldest continuously operating firm in the US. And it's sort of an iconic brand in the region. And so that side of it also was attractive to me, to see what we could do with an iconic brand that has been around for a long time.
One of the things that is often criticized by professionals in our industry, obviously, is low pay, low value. And you work in a lot of industries that is known for paying their people livable, sustainable living wages and having decent benefits. So obviously you've been in the startup world, and there's risk associated with startups and joining that. But did you even think twice kind of about, and I imagine you had to take a pay cut joining the A&E world?
No. So I took a pay cut. It was a pretty big drop down for me to do what I did. I did it because I was passionate, and I would say I was fortunately in a position where I had saved through my career, and that was not a concern. So not everybody I recognize is in that position. Nevertheless, I do care about making a living, and I believe that you should. And so this is not a charitable thing. It was really a way for me to enter into something that I really wanted to do. So I think it's important to me now. At that point, I did not anticipate becoming the CEO of the company. But from the beginning, I remember Eric Andrew, who's the person who hired me, saying, this is a really difficult business. This is a difficult career. And I've heard people from different industries say things like that to me before, but I don't think I've ever appreciated. I've not seen it to the extent that I see it in the design industry. I mean, it's hard. And he had an interest in exploring ways to mitigate that. And so do I. And so as a person who doesn't really do very well just accepting things how they are, it was kind of like a red rag to a bull for me. It's like, we've got to figure this out. We've got to understand and find a way. And, I'm not arrogant enough to think that everyone in the world has not tried this before. I think it's really hard. I think it's really difficult. But I believe, like with a lot of things, you've got to want to do it. And so because I started out my career in advertising, it made me feel like there's at least a chance that it can be done, right? Advertising has some similarities. It's a creative pursuit. You're selling a creative product, essentially, to people who want to make money out of what it is you're selling, which certainly if you're selling to real estate developers or is the case. But they're able to command a premium for what they do, and they're able to differentiate their creative services. Now, they also occasionally work insanely long hours, but it's not all the time. And they're also client facing, so they need to be responsive. So there's some similarities there. And there's, some of the same challenges are faced by that industry. I mean, I think, but what they've been successful in is getting paid a lot more money for what they do. And so that to me has always been something to look at is, if you're going to work hard, then let's make it worthwhile and at least make a living. And I want to counterbalance that. I think it's also important that what we do matters. And so it is not about making as much money as we humanly can. It's about making enough to make it worth doing and to be rewarded appropriately for what you do. And I think that at the end of the day is the goal. And hopefully to provide some balance in your life. That's the other thing that stood out to me.
Right. I was going to say, I kind of want to lean into this idea of that it is so much harder in architecture. So you've alluded a little bit to it, right? Like the value that we get paid for the services that we are delivering. What are some other things that you think makes it potentially so much harder now, having been in the AEC world a little bit longer?
So I think there are some, and I've worked with lots of professionals in lots of different industries, and I find there are some common threads. So one of them is that this is the way it is, and this is the way you have to do it. And if you're an outsider, you probably just wouldn't understand this. And I don't dismiss that. I have a lot of respect for all the professionals in different professions I've worked with. But I think it's also, if you're practicing, it's hard sometimes to step back and say, can we look at how we do this? And the thing that stands out to me more than anything is the ability to do it efficiently. Because I think if you can reduce the amount of time it takes to do something, then there is a way to be productive and therefore profitable and to have a quality of life. And I think most people I speak to believe that they've already done that. And it's not that they've made no effort in that regard. I think they have. But I think they often don't use the tools that perhaps other industries and other businesses have applied. And so the legal industry went through this probably a decade ago or maybe longer, where they started to realize that technology, efficiency, how they work, and they started hiring people, what they called them legal operations folks, inside their companies to focus on the operation, not the delivery so much of the service, but how the wiring in between the things that happen needs to happen. How do you do discovery, document discovery? How do you automate that? And like I said, I think a lot of the progressive firms in the country are looking at things like that. It's happening. People are doing it.
Thank you for allowing me to take a little bit of that detour. So we talked about kind of you entering Luckett and Farley from the marketing side, but a few years later, you found yourself in the role of CEO, which you mentioned you didn't anticipate when you joined. What series of decisions kind of led up to that?
So I had been at Luckett and Farley probably 4 years, I think, by the time this conversation came up. And it had probably been evolving. I'd been given some responsibilities that were broader than marketing prior to that. And I had actually had some design professionals reporting up to me through that before that, which was already a big deal and a pretty big departure. And so that was not my idea. That was Eric's idea. And the thinking there was that the design people know how to design. The people who were reporting directly to me were very experienced, and they were sort of leading pursuits and leading relationships with clients. So really the idea was that I would help them in that area to help develop their client skills, client relationships, how to win the work, but also with a view to how does that flow through the process of design and making money and being efficient and meeting clients' needs. And so my background really more than anything is how do you align a business to the client? And so by moving some of those folks underneath me, we started to have discussions about how does this relate to what our clients need, and how do we go about that? So that was the beginning. And then I think the other thing that happened was, and I remember a conversation that Eric and I had about, and I can't remember the specific instance, but he noticed something I was doing and asked me, where did you learn how to do that? And it was more of a leadership or a managerial type thing. I thought about it a little bit, and I realized that from the beginning of my career, I've always worked inside of sort of what I would call traditional businesses. There's been a focus from whoever was leading or managing me on my skills as a manager and a leader and a team member and a collaborator. And I have had that drilled into me for a really long time. And when I look at his career, what he's had drilled into him is, how do you design things? How do you design them better? How do you not get sued for them? How do you make sure that they're incredibly wonderful structures? What are all the millions of things you need to learn to put an incredible building together and make it, make money for the firm? So that's what his focus had been. But he really was a sort of an accidental manager and leader rather than a deliberate one.
Which is the position and a place where a lot of leaders, I think, in architecture firms find themselves for all of the reasons that you just listed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so at that point, he was like, he asked me, would you ever consider, leading this firm? And I had several reactions to that. One was abject fear, because it did seem like a really big leap. I was still learning how the industry works. And obviously, I'm not going to pretend to try and learn how to design anything, but at least how the business works and how the market works and how the client works. And I was concerned about whether I would be credible as a leader to our professionals, to our engineers and to our architects and our landscape architects and our interior designers. Like, would they trust me or any non-design professional to lead the firm? And then the other thing is I was just afraid I would fail. So I had a lot of fear. I wasn't convinced that it was what I wanted to do. And we talked about it for a little while. And I guess it was one of those things that I just sort of put to the side and thought maybe it might come up again. It might not. And Eric brought it back up and we discussed it some more. And in the end, when I agreed to say yes, I frankly agreed to say yes like you step off a cliff. It felt like I've been asked to do it. It's been put in front of me. This is where I'm supposed to go. This is what I'm going to do. And I really didn't know what was going to happen next entirely, to be honest.
And how many years ago was that now?
That was 2.5 years ago. It was in February 2022.
Okay. I mean, so it's also kind of an interesting time, coming out of the pandemic and a lot of changes in how we are working generally, and people getting, I mean, it's very hard for anyone to get comfortable with change, but just a lot of change because of that. I think that everyone's trying to figure out where we are on the other side of this huge global event. So how has it been since?
So I think the beginning was pretty hair-raising. And it was because of what you just said. Coming out of the pandemic, to your point, everyone had already been through a monumental amount of change personally. And the way we had been working throughout the pandemic was completely different. And that's part of what led to the discussions that Eric and I had. I think he noticed that it was much easier for me to adapt to that than it was for him. And I think that wasn't so much a personal thing as it was, he's an architect. He's been doing it for a long time, and he's used to being together with people as part of the process of creation and collaboration in the design process. I, on the other hand, have spent a large part of my career not being in the same place and often not even in the same country as the people I manage or am being managed by. But I've not been working on a design process that needs that sort of intensity. And so for me, when we went remote, the first thing I did, and it was instinctive, and it's not a book I read or something that someone taught me to do. My first thought is, how am I going to keep in touch with the people that I work with? And how's that going to work? And so we instituted a 15-minute check-in every single morning by video conference. And we hadn't been meeting for 15 minutes in person before that, So actually, if anything, our communication and our interaction actually improved immediately out of the pandemic. And so that was something that I did that, and I'm sure other people have done similar things. I don't think it's unique, but it made a difference. And he realized that there were things. So how I dealt with that, and I believed in our ability to do it from the beginning. We sent everybody home. I wasn't afraid of that. I wasn't afraid that we could do it. I think the other thing that happens that's really important, and I think I don't know if other people had this same conclusion, but I think the difference also in the way we handled that was a way of trusting what other people are doing. It's hard to work remotely, and if you don't trust what people are going to do. So what we learned, I think, in that period of time is you absolutely can trust them, and there are people that will lose your trust, and then you'll take the actions you need to take. But most professionals are responsible, driven, educated people who can figure out how to organize their time and work independently at the time that makes sense to them to get work done. And that's what we learned. And so coming out of the pandemic, that was the thing that I think we started to realize we can leverage this. And so that was probably the big first thing that I leaned into. We were also struggling to find talent. People had, changed jobs. There weren't enough architects and engineers in Louisville. And so we combined those two things, and we committed to a hybrid approach to our work from the day we went back to work after the pandemic. We didn't stop working. We opened our office, but we didn't require anyone to go there. We invested pretty heavily in cloud-based tools. We were already kind of 3/4 of the way there, so we went the rest of the way there. And I would say we took it on as an experiment. I think we were waiting to see if it was a disaster early, and then since it wasn't, then we kind of became more confident, and we kept going down that road. So that was probably the big thing that started. And I don't know, if we would have done that if it hadn't been for the pandemic. There's been some controversy about that internally. Can you do it? Can the design process work this way? And it's interesting. One of the fundamental, the word that gets used over and over again is, how do you mentor in a virtual environment? And that's been an ongoing discussion now for 2 years. And so to kind of fast forward to today, we actually have a team of people at the moment working on the answer to the question, what is mentorship? And what do we expect it to be? And what do we expect it to look like? And what came out of the first discussion we had is, so this is with, 7 disciplines of engineers, architects, and designers of different kinds. So the leaders of the groups internally. And all of their professions believe in and sort of encourage a mentorship model. And I've had that shared with me since the day I joined this firm. That's how this works. What no one has ever shared with me is, what is it? And how do you do it? And who's good at it? And who's not good? And so the business part of me and the process side of me, because I've worked in sort of process improvement type areas a lot of the time, it wants to break that down. So they've got a book that they're sharing, and I don't think it matters what the book is. It's more just to provoke thinking about, what is mentorship? What do we believe it should be? So one of the questions that came out of our first meeting on this was, is mentorship just about technical skills? And I think the answer for the team that they came to was that no, it's not. And so then what else is it? And something that I believe in very strongly is that ultimately the interpersonal skills around what we do might be, I don't know if they're more important, but they're equally important, at least in terms of how we get from one end of the, meeting a client all the way through to a constructed building at the other end. So teamwork as a skill, communication as a skill, coordination as a skill. There's all kinds of other skills that go along with being good at architecture and engineering. So then is, what does mentorship look like? What does that process look like? How do you teach someone to be a mentor? Not how do you mentor someone to design something? And so all of those conversations are beginning. And it's not that nobody knows how to mentor or they've never done it before, but they've not collectively, at least, stepped back and looked at and examined how they're doing mentorship and how they teach mentorship to other people and what it is we're mentoring and why we're mentoring and to what end. So I think that's pretty exciting. It's maybe seemed like a small detail, or maybe I'm sure other folks have had these ideas. We're not unique, but it's just a greater intention focused on things like that. And part of that for us has to be, because of the decision we've already made, how to do that in remote circumstances. So how do I mentor someone who's not physically where I'm at? What kind of tools and technology am I going to need to support that? And what kind of tools am I going to need to support a remote design process or a creative process?
What is interesting to me is I always feel like architects talk about this all the time, right? The biggest thing about a flexible hybrid virtual environment is mentoring the next generation. And then, I look back at my own personal mentorship, and it's really, throw them into the deep end, see if they can swim, learn by doing, and I was partnered with principals usually because I was able to anticipate what they want before they asked. So I tended, no matter where I worked, I tended to be placed on the most difficult teams just because I was good at anticipating things. But that didn't have anything to do with like helping me learn and grow as an individual and actually receiving proper mentorship or leadership. So just I appreciate the extra intentionality that you're putting around it, because I don't think we've actually really placed any intentionality around mentorship in a meaningful and helpful way for the most part.
Yeah, well, it's early days, so we're having the discussion, and even having the discussion. Honestly, if we do nothing else, I think we've at least highlighted the awareness already that it's sort of a word we take for granted. And so part of the other piece of the discussion came around the perceived inability for us to mentor remotely. And the question I asked is, how well are we mentoring? Were we mentoring before the pandemic? How good at it were we? Was it enough? And my supposition was that if we really focus on how to mentor remotely, it's not maybe that high of a bar for us to mentor better remotely than we were mentoring in person before the pandemic.
Right. I often cringe at it's like mentorship through osmosis, right? By being in the studio, by overhearing others take calls, you're learning. And then I recall all the times that I walked into studios pre-pandemic, and I would have been one of those individuals if I were at a computer, headset on, listening to music, doing the work, not taking in anything by osmosis. So, was that truly happening?
So it's interesting. And I think I think it's very easy in these conversations to have a sort of an all or nothing conversation about almost anything. And so I don't ignore that has happened, can happen, does happen. And again, I think it happens better when it's intentional. So I actually worked with for a gentleman earlier in my career who his first job, the CEO of the company had him sit in his office with him so that he could just hear what a CEO does. And he shared with me, how valuable that was to him. But that was very intentional, and it wasn't forever. It was for a period of time. And I actually recently heard from one of our employees who'd sat next to actually my predecessor, Eric, and was like, wow, I learned so much from listening to him. So again, I think you can create those opportunities. They don't have to be accidental. And so if that's valuable and if that's important, then make it happen. Don't trust that it might happen by accident. Take the accident out of it and make it a thing. And so to me, that's really what this is about, is to go after the goal, not just, say, well, it's much easier if we're all in the office. And honestly, I think the idea that we, quote, collaborate accidentally when we're in the office is kind of lazy. It's sort of like, well, if we put everyone together, I don't have to think about it. They just bump into each other and I absolve myself of the responsibility to having to figure it out. And so this way, I think you really have to think about, what do we want them to learn? Who do they need to learn it from? How are they going to learn it? And it's about growth and development. And that really, at the end of the day, for me, is what all of this is about. If we do that well, everything else will take care of itself.
So we talked a little bit about, we've talked a lot about mentorship, which I appreciate. And I almost wish Janine had been able to find time to join us on this call, because my previous co-host would have definitely appreciated that as well. Is there any other things that you've really done to kind of change the mindset of how Luckett and Farley approaches things since you've taken on the CEO role?
I think there's probably a couple of other things. One is the importance of the client. And again, that I suspect anyone could listen to what I just said and said, yeah, of course we do that. And I think that also there are probably lots of people who are further ahead in regard to what I'm going to say. And it's really important for me to say that I do not believe we are figuring out stuff that no one has figured out before. I'm new to this. We're not, the greatest firm in the world. We have aspirations to be an awful lot better. And so I just think it's important to put some context around that. The client, first of all, the question we had to answer, is the client the top of the totem pole? Like, is that where everything ends up? Is that the top? And we had discussions about, well, is it the user? Are they the client? Is it the person who's paying the bill is the client? How important are the employees? And so all of those things are important. But at the end of the day, our business succeeds and fails by whether we get paid money to do what we do, right? That is, and we don't have the opportunity to serve the people who live in the buildings or live in the communities or our employees if we don't meet that basic need. And so then the next question is, well, so how well do we understand the client? If we are going to be client driven, what does that mean? And how do we ensure ourselves that we know what clients want? And again, people who've been in the industry for 30 years will have a really good intuition for what that is. They've had lots of experience. It's not always easy to teach or write down. And so how do you better understand the client and turn that into information that you can use to run your business better? And so one of the things that we are on the brink of implementing, and this is something I've done over and over again in countless different businesses and industries, is to put in place a mechanism to collect feedback from our clients about how we're doing. And it's not rocket science. We're not asking deep, profound questions. We're asking basic satisfaction questions and a few metrics on how we do our work. And what it will allow us to do is measure our performance through the eyes of our clients. Not what we think it is, not how good we think it is, but how they think it is. So we're getting ready to do that. We'll see how it goes. We'll hopefully at least have a metric internally every year for client satisfaction. I know already that we're not perfect. And, like a lot of leaders in companies, I hear from clients when things don't go perfectly. I make it clear to our clients that they need to call me when that's the case. Because the reason I tell them that I want to know that is we can't get better if we don't know. And so to me, the only way we get better is to have an accurate understanding of what our clients think about how we're doing. And then we need an internal process to turn that into improvement. And so we made a decision last year to create a full-time position, so a non-billable position, responsible entirely for continuous improvement. And so their job will be to help us prioritize and then implement the changes we need to make in processes or training or design or recruitment or whatever part of the business we feel it impacts to better meet the client's needs and to improve. So the fundamental basis for me, and probably also because we're an ESOP. So as an ESOP, which is an employee-owned company, for those folks who don't know what that is, our employees own the company and are rewarded by increases in value in the company. And in order to do that, we have to grow our profit. And in order to grow, you have to get better. And so to get better every year, we need to look at what we do and how we do it and have a way to get. So we need to know where we are, how we do things, and then how we're going to do it differently and better next year. And our hope is that part of the metrics of that will be how our clients feel.
As an aside, I kind of want to ask, do you imagine that individual coming from the architecture field or coming from an outside field?
So the person's already in place. So she's actually an interior designer by training, but she's run a range of different functions inside of Luckett and Farley. So she's been a head of our interior design function. She's been a project manager. She's been a client leader. So she understands the business well, but she's also very strong from a process point of view and an execution point of view of, I would say, business processes and design processes. That's what she's inclined towards. She's good at that. And so she helps us implement the change, train the change, document the change so that as new people come into the company, they know how we do things.
Great. Was there anything, you did mention a few things and we've gone over a few things. Is there anything else that you would love to touch on before we move on to the next subject?
Yeah, I think the only other thing is probably culture.
That's no small thing.
No. So the hybrid decision is a big part of that. I think that the why we do what we do is really important. And there's not a person in our company who's not very passionate about design. But I think I've met very few design professionals who don't fall into this category. Most design professionals care about what they designed does. You know, how does it affect the world, the community? And so we, again, have started thinking more deeply about that and how what we do impacts things. And so there's work still for us to do on that. We wanted to have essentially an emotional benefit from what we do, not just a functional one. And we believe that design should do that. And my background says to me that design is things that are designed well are more valuable than things that are not. I think there's proof of that, but it's just ingrained in me that is true. And I think actually if there's a weakness of the profession, it's our inability to prove that and convince people of that. And so that's something worthwhile for the long haul. But people must come to work for a reason. They must care about what they're doing. And so our goal is that we bring joy to our clients and ultimately through the work we do for them to their employees, to the communities they serve. And that's the metric. And that's actually embedded in part of our client survey. Are they, and I don't think we'll use the word joy with them, but, you know, are they getting something positive? Are we exceeding their expectations? Is the end result better than they thought it could be? And is it having a positive impact? And part of that has to be not just as designers, but as a company and as employees. What are we doing individually to advance things that matter to us culturally? And so there's really two things: our impact on the community and the communities where we work, because that for us can be pretty far across the country. And then our impact on the climate and on the planet. And so to make that instead of a thing that we can respond to. So if you say, hey, I need to meet a LEED goal, or design me a solar array, or, you know, I want a passive house. Instead of it sort of being a kind of a menu item of things I might want to purchase, I think really it's the other way around. What is our mission? to help enable more sustainable design through different kinds of conversations with our clients about the financial benefits, about the brand benefits, about and so that's a different kind of conversation, and that's not been the way we've oriented it until now. And so I think it's being a more aggressive and more deliberate about building a capability to convince our clients that that is something that they can achieve despite what their conceptions might be about cost and other things.
I want to get more tangible here. So obviously kind of there's a mindset shift that you're trying to create with this culture change. What does that look like in terms of implementation at the project level, and how is that done?
Yeah, so I think we're in the early days of it. So I'll tell you where we're at. So let me talk about sustainability in particular. So the first thing was it's amazing how some small changes can enable people to act differently. So the first thing is by telling everybody, and again, I think so many firms, there are thousands of firms probably that are committed to sustainability, and some who do an amazing job of this, and we're not those folks yet. I think the first thing is for everyone to know that it's a priority and that they are going to be supported and encouraged if they come forward with ideas and initiatives to support it, so that it frees you up to know that that's going to be seen positively, supported, approved of. So that was the first thing. So we came up with 5 things that we are for the long haul committed to, and sustainability was one of them. The other is that the part of the reason we feel so strongly about it, one is we believe in it, but the other is we think as a multidisciplinary firm, we are better equipped to answer it. So while, architecture is going to lead typically the sort of conceptual framework of a building design, MEP plays a massive role in the delivery of performance, of building performance. And so, by bringing together the disciplines, civil engineering is going to have impact on the way we use water and so on. So if you aren't holistically thinking about it from a disciplinary point of view, so because we're multidisciplinary, we think sustainability, unites those things, and then that gives us a better platform. So that was part of why we got to where we did. The next piece was to form a leader internally, and not so much an external facing, but and we have a very small group. And the first goal, we did 2 things coming out of our strategic planning. One was to let everyone know that they should have sustainability goals for their department and for their team where it's relevant. It won't always be relevant to everyone based on their role, but to look at that. So I think most of our disciplines have goals about training and development for different people. So some of it might be a certification, some of them it might be a skill thing, some of them it might be new areas to explore. So everyone, and they were small. It wasn't these massive, huge initiatives. So just everyone has got I'll call it a micro goal that addresses sustainability, so we can move forward. And then that same team was asked to come up with one goal for this year to kind of advance the idea within the company. And their decision was really that what we need is to decide where we're going. So what they're working on is what is our long-term goal in terms of our impact on climate. And I know, again, there are tons of initiatives out there. The AIA has one, everyone else has one. We as a firm don't have one today. And the only other piece I think that was in there was to start to put some measurement things in there for our projects and for sort of the easier things to chip away at, especially on the MEP side. There are some where you can start looking at Energy Star ratings and things like that. And so it's sort of metrics, vision, and some small incremental goals to start just moving people along.
Now, what I appreciate about this conversation is we have a lot of younger listeners who I feel are internal change agents, right? They end up trying to be intrapreneurs within the firm that they're working in because they don't have the leadership with the same vision. But here is a leader that I think, at a very basic level still struggles with the same getting things done at the implementation scale, just because a matter of changing things like culture, especially in a firm your size with your history, that change doesn't come easy for anyone.
No, and you said something earlier that made me think about, I think the most underestimated challenge, and I've seen folks internally that I work with struggle with this. I see it in other businesses. This is not unique to architecture. Change management is not a small thing to take on. Any kind of change will fail if you don't bring people with you. And the processes and the communication and frankly the time to make that happen, you can't just flick a switch and change everyone's mind and point in a different direction. It's really hard to do. And so alignment of people and bringing people along to do that is a difficult thing. So, we spent 2 days lining this out. We've spent a lot of time thinking about the process for each of the priorities that we laid out as to how they, and again, I know we're not unique in this, but it's slow. So we didn't try and boil the ocean. We picked a thing for each of the 5 areas we decided to focus on. And they're things that shouldn't take a lot of time and are small and will move us forward.
Yeah, no, I just think it's important for people to hear that no matter what position you are, no matter what your title is in any firm, that engaging in any type of change throughout the firm is indeed a hard process.
Yeah. And I hope, that your listeners, if, that they have someone they can go to who can help them understand how to help change happen. Because I do see a lot of great ideas, and I can't, or my leadership team doesn't have the bandwidth to absorb every great idea that it happens in our company every day. And I know that's frustrating for people. It's like, I got this, we can do this. And I don't want to discourage that thinking, but I think what I can do as a leader to help is to help them understand how to be effective in bringing ideas forward like that and helping them happen, which is very different than having the idea. And so that's a skill that I don't think is appreciated, is what it takes to sell an idea, to get others to buy into it, and to make the change happen. And so I think our leaders can teach their teams how to do that. And I spend a fair bit of time with folks who will come to me with an idea. It's like, well, this is how you need to write something to describe it to other people, or this is how you need to get people to give you feedback, or this is how you can refine your idea and get buy-in at the same time. And so those are just not, like, to me, that's an explicit action skill. It's not something that you kind of choose to do. You have to do it.
And it's a learned skill. And I think, that's something that I experience very much being within tech, right? Like the moments you get with the executive team are so slim, and not only training yourself to say only the most meaningful things in a way that tells a story, but actually gets the point across and it's memorable enough for them to hold on to it. And it's a lot to put into a package. And if I think about historically what I am taught as an architect, how to defend a thesis, we create a lot of stuff in order to tell that story. So it's quite the opposite in terms of condensing it all down in order to institute change in an organization or even get the attention of leadership. And this, by the way, is true of a lot of architects that come with me that have, we need advice. We have this startup. And usually I just flip through what is like this 50-page pamphlet. And I was like, you don't actually have any financials here. So let's start with that. But the fact that it is 50 pages is is something we need to work on too. So I have a question for you. I mean, obviously you're engaging in organizations like the AIA where other architect leaders are. So how has you being a CEO of an AEC or an AE firm with multiple studios, as you mentioned, but not being an architect, how are you received by your peer CEOs?
Mostly, I would say, well, I think though some of that is due to the fact that I made an intention to kind of engage. I'm conscious. So first of all, let me step back and talk a little bit about the AIA, because I think it'll give some context. I believe very strongly in most any industry that there is value in organizations that support a profession. Like it's an important part of any profession. And so to me, without knowing really a ton about the AIA or about the profession I'm still 6 years into this only. I think it is important for us to be respectful of, contribute to, and enhance that organization. And my experience also has been there are very few industry organizations that don't provide immense value to their profession. And so personally, it just seemed like an obvious place for me to go. Now, it's an organization for architects principally, and I'm not one. And so I made a call, and I'd thought about it before I became CEO, and I regret I didn't do it earlier. But I made a call to the director of the Kentucky AIA and asked, like, how does this work? I'm leading an architecture firm. I'm not an architect, and so I became an associate member. And I asked her how I can get involved. How can I help? I know I'm not going to be involved from a design perspective, and so I got involved in two different things. One was the legislative group, and the other was and the second one I was invited to, and it'll answer your question about how was I accepted. So at the same time, I asked Kelly Ives, who's the director here in Kentucky. I asked her, if there was she could give me some of the contact information to some of the presidents of the other firms in the state. I knew who most of them were. They're competitors of ours. It's a small community. We know who they are, but I didn't have contact information. And I asked her opinion if she thought there would be people who'd be more receptive or not, because I hadn't met them. And I essentially cold called them and said, "Hey, I'd love to come and meet and chat," And I did. I went and met with some of them, not all of them. And so there's some I still haven't met. And I would say in every case, I was well received. I suspect that some of them were more skeptical than others. And I don't think they were openly skeptical to me. But I suspect if I was them, I would be marketing the fact that their major competitor is not led by a designer. That's, how can they possibly know what they're doing? And fortunately, we are full of designers who know exactly what they're doing. So I'm not too worried about that. But I think one of the things that was really exciting to me was when one of the leaders of a firm in Lexington, Kentucky, called me and said, "Hey," and this was after we'd met, we'd had breakfast together, and I could tell that we had a meeting of the minds, because I think he's an extremely open-minded person who recognizes the value of things outside of his own profession. I didn't know how far that went until he called me and asked me if I would be co-chair with him for the inaugural Christopher Kelly Leadership Development Program in Kentucky. And I think that's a really big deal for him to ask me. I think it's kind of brave to invite someone who's not a professional in your profession to get involved in something that's that significant and important. And so I was both honored and humbled to be asked, but also more than anything, kind of impressed by, and the person I'm talking about is a gentleman by the name of Jeff Stivers, who runs Ross Tarrant Architects in Lexington. I was amazed that he would have the idea to ask me to do that. It would be much easier for him to go to one of the firms he knows with the guys he knows, and I think that's pretty amazing. And I'm very grateful to him for having included me. It also gave me a front row seat to see up and coming architects throughout Kentucky and watch the talent unfolding and hear what they're thinking about and being taught about outside of my own firm. So that was an amazing opportunity for me. And that's part of the reason I believe in things like the AIA. You get an opportunity to see what's going on in the world. What's the best? Who's doing it? What are people thinking about? How's the profession evolving? And so to not be part of that, to me, seems like a real tragedy, to be honest. And so I'm very grateful. And then the flip side of it is I hear every now and again, and I've heard it at sometimes from inside my own firm, and certainly I've heard it from other places in our own community. The AIAs, it's not doing it right, it's not good enough, and whatever the versions of that. And so my answer to that is, well, then get involved, change it, change your profession, do something about it, commit to it, get engaged. And so that's what I'm doing to the best of my ability. And so hopefully I bring something different. I'm sure I bring something different. I'm not sure whether it's valuable or not. The others will have to tell you whether that's of any use. But it's certainly been valuable for me. And I feel like I've been extremely well received. I'm very grateful for the open-mindedness of the folks in Kentucky who've kind of embraced me. So that's been my experience, which I'm delighted about.
You alluded to this a little bit earlier in our conversation. I don't know if any of our listeners will remember, but architects tend to take on this notion that we are so special, that there isn't anything that we can learn from other industries because what we do is so unique and particular. And it is true that, every time we create a new product, it's kind of the prototype of that product. But how much truth is in that? And where do you see the biggest opportunity for us to, in fact, lower that wall and learn more from outside industries?
I think the first thing to me is that if you believe that, then it is a barrier to your ability to find new things and learn new things. So I think it is, what is it? There is I think it's Herbert Spencer who said contempt prior to investigation, who talked about contempt prior to investigation. So if you don't look outside of it, you will never know whether that's true or not. There is no question that architects and engineers are unbelievably smart, talented people who are educated to do incredibly complicated and difficult things and have amazing talents. I think I have worked in my career with doctors, lawyers, and architects, and they share some traits, which is that they all have what I just described, very smart, very well-educated people. I think each of them comes from professions where they are educated to believe that their profession is, very important. I'm going to understate that a little bit. And so it's easy to get the idea that, that you are sort of better than, I guess I'm going to say that word. And we've all got different skills. We've all learned different things. And my I would say probably the most important thing to me in my career has been to recognize that. I can't innovate if I'm not willing to look at what somebody in a different profession or with a different background or with different beliefs or a different culture. And so the concept of diversity, we talk about diversity a lot, and I think a lot of times in all the wrong ways. Celebrating difference and bringing different perspectives from different places, to me, is perhaps the most valuable thing that we can do. And so architecture can't get better if we keep using the same tool set against the same thing over and over. And so, I think back, and these are business school stories from, probably 30, 40 years ago. I think Southwest Airlines, when they were trying to figure out how to load and empty a plane faster, went to a car racing team to look at how they change tires so fast. There are all kinds of other people that can teach us how to do things and look at things in a way that we never would. I think some of the most successful designers do an amazing job at bringing people into the design process who come from different design disciplines or even non-designers. Design thinking as a process is about making sure that multiple inputs are brought into, including the client's input and the users. And so there's lots of programming approaches that do that by definition, but we don't do that about our business. So I look straight down this sort of tunnel into my business. And one of the things another thing that we did differently at Luckett and Farley, it's a small thing. Like most firms, we have an accountant, we have a lawyer, we have people who supply us with technology, we have, I'm missing probably a range of different vendors. We can treat them as just vendors, or we can look at them and say, how do these people add value to our business? And so we actually, in the last 3 years, I think, have changed every single vendor relationship that we have. And not on purpose. We didn't set out to change them all. What we set out to do was to answer, what do these partners bring to us beyond just providing the service we're asking them for? So, for example, in the case of our accountants, how well connected are they to prospective clients? What can they teach us about how to run our business? When they provide an audit to us, do they provide an audit that just tells us, how to do a tactical accounting thing, or do they tell us strategic things that would be valuable to our business? Our IT firm, are we looking for IT firms who are bringing us ideas and interested in showing us how to do things new, or are they waiting for a phone call because we want to buy a new computer? Like, there's a really big difference in the kind of relationships. Our lawyers, are they connected to clients? Are they connected to government? Do they provide something beyond, hey, we've got a legal issue and I need you to fix it? And so I think looking at all ranges of people, so how we run our business, but then also within the practice, where can we bring ideas like different? So one of the benefits of hybrid for us is that we're recruiting people who are living in communities where different things are happening. So we aren't we're headquartered in Kentucky, and we're still small. So we're not we don't have offices all over the country and stuff like that. But because we're hybrid, we've got folks in Chicago, in Seattle, in Orlando, and that brings a different perspective to what we do and to the thought process. And we have people who've come from other firms that have been more successful than us that bring new ideas. So the openness to me is the crucial thing, and just to recognize you don't know, you don't have all the answers, you can't have all the answers. So bringing others in has to be. If I sit here and think I'm going to figure out how to make it Luckett and Farley brilliant on my own, I mean, and 99% of everything I've said in this call is stuff I've either learned from somebody else, was shown in another industry. And I don't know how much of it's going to end up being useful or valuable. We'll find out.
I've been thinking a lot about mindset and the self-limiting beliefs that we have in architecture that has kind of held us back. And I feel like this is just another one of those things. So I appreciate your perspective and kind of how you framed it. And I forgot literally about all those case studies about how other people found new ways of doing things by looking at entirely different and unrelated industries, right? Or even sports stadiums looking to Disney on how to queue lines better, right? Things like that. I want to ask you kind of close on a broader question. Knowing what you do know of the AEC industry, where do you think is the best or the next or the biggest opportunity that we have in the future for us to make an impact?
I have some ideas. One thing that we've explored, it's not something we're doing, and we've had discussions about it, and I think it relates to improving the stature, I guess, of architecture within client organizations. And what I mean by that is a lot of times the person we talk to every day about a project is not the owner of a business, especially when you have bigger clients. And so you often are interacting with somebody who is executing with a budget and may not see or may not be as interested in the strategic value of what's being done. It's not always the case, but it may be. And my business experience is that getting to CEO board level to have discussions about the importance of design, the value of design, is important if you are going to be able to have a good enough discussion about value added, about a real design driven process. And so there's And that's hard sometimes for architecture firms to get to that place because it's not considered at board level in most companies that it's important to talk to architects, unless you'll have an owner or a leader who intuitively believes in that and they'll drive that. And so one of the ways to get there for me is to look at consulting services that are broader and more business related. And so how do you, and there are firms who are not architects. So IDEO is a great example where they make design strategic at a corporate level, not just about buildings and facilities, but just the idea of the value and importance of design. So to me, there's some blurring at some point between especially sustainability and design, where there's an opportunity to start thinking more strategically about the importance of design in business and in lots of processes. My wife worked for Procter & Gamble in design. They had a design leader in a company that sells, shampoo. But that was a massive change for them because they had a leader, A.G. Lafley, who recognized the importance of design as a driver of business, as a driver of value. So those are rare, and to be able to educate and influence at that level, I think, runs downstream and allows more opportunity for margin in the design process because it's perceived to be more important. So that's one thing. I think that's probably the big thing. I think the other piece is we have to do a better job of proving the value of design economically. And other industries do a better job of that, I think. Then the last one I'll talk about, because everyone talks about it, is AI, but I kind of want to flip it on its head. And so to me, AI will be successful for us if we don't start with AI. AI is the answer, not the question. And so to me, we need to start out with our strategies and then how can AI accelerate the things we are trying to do? So in our case, how can it accelerate collaboration? How can it accelerate efficiency? How can it accelerate design? How can it provide more options? And so it needs to work for us. And I think so by embracing that instead of being afraid of it, I think that's really going to be crucial, that people jump in and start figuring out how does this. And so sometimes you can play, just experiment without knowing where you're going. But I've been through so many different versions of this where the people who make innovation through new technologies, it's because they know what they were trying to do. They know what their goal was. And so I think for AI, that's what's going to happen for us too, is we have to decide where we want it to help us and then work towards that goal.
Hi, Disruptors. Thank you for joining us today on an episode of Practice Disrupted. If you like the content for today's show, you can find all of our past episodes over on practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. Be a part of the conversation by joining me, our speakers, and other disruptors in our community at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Our social media handle is Practice of Arch. That's Practice of ARCH. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to drop us a DM and say hello. Tune in next week for a new conversation on change in the profession.